Good afternoon, everyone in the Zoom and also in YouTube. Welcome again to the Wednesday Forum for today. We're so glad that today we have not mantan, but our friends, our old friends. Meaning we have been in friendship for for a long time, and so we have her again as our speaker for our Wednesday forum. And she is Julie Gaynes. Julie Gaynes is a PhD candidate now at University of California, Los Angeles. She is now researching on healing relationship between human and human person spirits in the Solor Archipelago of Eastern Indonesia. She was at CRCS in 2013 and 2015. And while she was at CRCS, she was engaged much with discourses at CRCS, including the life of indigenous people, the discourse of indigenous people, indigenous religions. And today she is going to talk about, as we have seen in the brochure, on oral history as literature. This is a big theme, a challenging theme, as we have known that oral history has been somehow excluded in the literature due to the emphasis on the written history, written tradition. And so I think Julie would show us that the oral history, not only like a source of history, but also literature, resourceful literature for us to understand, the humanities, to understand the life of people. And for that theme, she is going to focus on the community in the Lama Holot region of Nusa Tenggara Timur. In her research, she argues that that community demonstrates sophisticated understanding of health beyond biomedical definitions. And that is, I think, one among the issues that Julie is going to discuss with us about challenges that traditional healers facing to the system, medical system. As we also know that several years ago, the state, even in that region, was also like issuing a regulation regulating the traditional healing. And so I think that those are among the issues that we are going to hear from Julie. And so Julie, you will have 40 to 40 minutes to make your presentation. And then after that, we will have follow-up discussions, interactive discussion, comments and questions from participants. And for the participants, both in YouTube and here at Zoom, you would have a chance to raise questions, comments through chatting. Through the chat. You can write down your questions, comments in this chat, and also in YouTube. And for those who are in Zoom, you could also raise your hand if you want to deliver your question, comments verbally after Julie makes her presentation. And so without further ado, I would give this to Julie. And Julie, time is yours.
Thank you, Mas Anchu. Hello. I'm seeing some familiar names and faces from when I was at CRCS. I miss all of you. I'm grateful to be among such great scholars now that I am pursuing my own research and religious and cross-cultural studies in Indonesia, largely inspired by you. So Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I really look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments at the end of the talk. As Mas Anshu mentioned, I am a PhD in culture and performance at University of California, Los Angeles. And I, as someone who's passionate about literature, but also am passionate about Indigenous religions, I am interested in how I can work with the oral histories of locals in Nusa Tenggara Timur to have their voices reflected on a page in a way that does justice to their forms of knowledge. So I'm not sure if any of us have heard of the Lamal Holot region of Nusa Tenggara Timur, but I conducted most of my research thus far on the island of Lembata, which is off the coast of Flores. And Lembata used to be part of the region of East Flores and is now independent. And so my work is with women healers, specifically on the island of Lembata. And my challenge thus far has been to decipher the different ways in which women healers perceive the art of healing and the longevity of local healing knowledge as times are constantly changing. So I've collected the histories of these 5 women who I will introduce you to later in the talk. And first, I would like to introduce you to one, because I think every good talk begins with a good story. This here is my avatar throughout the art book I created based on the 5 women I worked with. Introducing Mother Maria, who's a traditional midwife, or Dukun Bersalin. She's age 76 and her entire life has lived in the mountains of Lembata. So she told me this story as we were sitting in her little working hut in Lyric, in the mountain town. And this was right at the time when her granddaughter was about to receive First Communion. And I had been welcomed there by my site guide, Pak Dominicus. And she told me that there were times in which biomedicine couldn't heal grave illnesses for people. And at those times, indigenous religion had to step in. When I asked her for an example, she told me this story. There was a couple, a man and wife, who lived in Lyric, and they prepared for their first child. Their father-to-be acted strangely. He just sat and cried without reason. Before the birth, this was. The birthing ended and the child was dead. The people in the hospital at first cried, and they tried to revive the baby. Up and down, they threw the dead child, but the baby didn't wake. So this is me here in the corner listening. 2 days passed. After those 2 days, at 5 o'clock on the dot, when the sun almost set, I entered the yard of the grieving mother. I paid tribute done. She asked strength from God, said Pak Dominicus, my site guide. I worshiped, the worshiping finished. I went to the bedroom where mama of the child just sat and cried. The dead baby was on the bed. To the father I said, you, get out. I throw you like my sandal outside. Wear a sarong so you can humble yourself to the ancestors, and I can work. The mother of the newborn couldn't handle it. I lifted the child well. I turned him around. The head was below, the feet above. This is the best part. I smacked the child. I said, "You live so that we can respect God. You have committed no wrong. A child is clean. It's your father who was wrong." Until the hand moved like this and the foot moved like this. "You are saved," I said aloud. I set the child down to sleep. I announced, "You are not allowed to wake this child. You are not allowed to give the child milk. Send him to sleep." Now the child began to move. He had a voice like cooking water cooking. Cold, 1, 2 seconds. I gave the child a drink. With the droplets of water placed on the formerly dead baby's tongue, Mama Maria had to count. "We shouldn't give too much water at first," said Pac Dominicus. The breath, the voice was like the sound when we are cooking vegetables. The people outside the house cried, couldn't handle it. The father was still alive, toch. The father had already seen the haunting presence of dead spirits, already seen the ancestors carry his unborn child. It was the wrongdoing of the father. Before the baby was born, the ancestors had already brought the unborn child with them and paraded here and there around the neighborhood, as if to take the babe to their world. She says, "I had already gotten 2 times a dream that helped me see the child's father's soiled deeds, that helped me understand that the ancestors had taken the child before its time." Until the boy I saved was 8 or 9 years old, his breathing was still noisy, like a grown person snoring. I assured people, later when he's big, the noise will go away by itself. He says, "Mama conducted all the necessary ceremonies so that the boy healed. She can overcome all hindrances to health with ceremonies to free everything first, so a person can give birth without a problem." Now he's already in college, is already big and tall. He's handsome too, already has a job. Finished. And she actually said finished. She's quite a character. So this is an excerpt from my 178-page book, which tries to capture, in a sense, the miracles that these women have conducted through their ceremonial practices, miracles that biomedicine could not have accomplished. So what's the point of conserving local knowledge, I guess, is the question that I think many of us work with. And so my argument is that local knowledge helps conserve a sense of identity and also a sense of connection. And I think we saw through this story of Ibu Maria that imbued within her power and her ability to heal is also this connection to prayer, to ancestors, to geographic location. Connections that maybe those of us who are wrapped up in modernity, wrapped up in biomedicine, don't have any longer. I define healing essentially as people who are not only traditional healers in the sense of dukun, or even of healers in the medical industry, but really any person who is able to restore this imbalance between self and environment. And I'll pause here to note that most of my colleagues in Lambata affirm that personalized and local healing knowledge serves alongside clinical medicine, and that health or kesehatan hinges as much on social harmony as it does on internal and physical balance. And so the importance, I think, and the wisdom behind local knowledge is that it incorporates holistic understandings of what it means to be a person in balance with one's ecosystem. Whereas generally in the West, and there are stereotypes, especially about Los Angeles, there might be some shallowness when it comes to hyper-attention to physical health when the social aspects are undermined. So I talk a little bit about local knowledge and how knowledge is specific to, according, as Geertz popularized in theory, that knowledge is local for each person, but then also for particular communities. So how can local knowledge of people like Ibu Maria, people like the indigenous women I work with, how can that local knowledge travel, not only to different hands, to you in Java, to me in Los Angeles, to my peers who have never met these women, who are in my life in Chicago or somewhere in Los Angeles, people who don't know anything about Indonesia. How can the knowledge of people like Ibu Maria travel, not only to different locations, but also to new generations, because landscapes also change as technologies change the landscape. So my argument is that local knowledge can travel across time and space, so long as that knowledge maintains, or the harborers of those knowledge systems maintain practices for remembering past identities, perhaps through ritual. B, so long as those knowledge systems can adapt to other knowledge systems without being overpowered. So as long as Western knowledge systems don't overtake everything. And third, so long as it's recognized that those knowledge systems can contribute new or pertinent notions of the possible. So local knowledge such as Ibu Maria's can travel so long as outside or other knowledges recognize that these other knowledge systems provide assets in ways that we might not anticipate. Am I moving too fast?
No.
Okay.
You're good.
Thanks, Masanshu. Okay, so what's the problem here? As and I think this is something that CRCS discusses in every day, in every social action it takes. But as the problem here is that as colonial knowledge spreads, indigenous knowledge and local identities tend to get erased. So as Lambata, which is this region off the coast of Flores, currently doesn't have a bookstore yet, and is struggling to develop its infrastructure, and yet still the school systems are imposing colonial knowledge systems, ideas of biomedicine, as the only way of looking at health and healing. So what does that do to local knowledge? What does that do to local identity and sense of purpose in our lives? So in doing this work, I wanted to take a look at the laws. So the Indonesian government defines health as the state of physical, mental, spiritual, and social wellness, which allows every person a socially and economically productive life. So I found this really an interesting definition in the Indonesian constitution because it includes the spiritual and social wellness within its definition of health and healing. And yet the laws which regulate what indigenous healers can do and which restricts them don't take into account the social relationships that people have with ancestors, with local spirits, with the relationships that imbue their healing knowledge with power. And the problem is, despite the fact that the law recognizes that those social relationships are powerful, there's nothing in the law really that gives rights to people whose knowledge can't be tested in a laboratory. So now we're in an age when everything health related has to be tried and tested in Western ways. But how can you test the power of prayer? So since new pressures by the World Health Organization have pushed communities to define local healing in terms accessible to global interpretation, categories of traditional healing distinguish the diverse proficiency of local healers, even as they pigeonhole these healers into outsider categories. So even as the World Health Organization is starting to industrialize things like jamu, they pigeonhole these healers into something unknown. These indigenous healers can't be tried, can't be monitored, can't be tested. And so they can't really be included in our system. So what happens when the guidelines for the SGPT and the SGPK, for which all healers have to sign up for, don't incorporate indigenous voices? Well, what happens is that, especially in places like Lambata or places where some of us work, maybe it's hard to find a printer to print out the documents that an indigenous healer might need in order to register as a legitimate practitioner of medicine. And then number two is like, who is making all the rules for testing these healers, right? They're not local healers themselves who don't have the voices. So women dukun like Ibu Maria doesn't have a say in determining what sorts of things qualify, make a indigenous healer qualify as legitimate. Despite her claims as having helped hundreds and hundreds of women throughout the course of her 50 years of practicing. Okay, so here's the whole thing about the art book. I know it took me a while to get here, but okay, how do you raise consciousness about ideas like this? Where does the activism come in when people aren't reading? And I'm not sure about where, I'm sure, you know, in our circles, I'm sure people are reading, but in the US too, people who I think could benefit the most from learning from other different knowledge systems aren't really reading academic papers. So what do we do about it? So my proposal is that I would like to explore this new field of creative research expressions. How do we use our academic research and express it in creative ways so that people outside the institution are also interested in reading. So when I was teaching at UGM, I worked at Sastra Inggris, and I was kind of amazed that in Indonesia, there's not much of a culture of reading, but the students who were reading were interested in things like Harry Potter, or they were interested in this. I was practicing gamelan one day in the Union, and I saw that some teenagers were reading this comic. And so I thought, okay, so for the youth, what are they interested in reading? Seems like they're interested in reading books that build worlds for them, that build experiences for them in ways that can help them maybe disappear into a story. And then in the United States, I also realized that there are some changes happening here too. So people who aren't necessarily interested in reading history books are now interested in reading things that are kind of new to the publishing world. So Mouse is a very popular, very well acclaimed graphic novel about the history of the Holocaust. And you see that the mice are the Jews who were held in concentration camps, and the cats obviously are the Nazis. So it tells the history in an accessible way. Fun Home was a book that made a big splash in literature as a graphic novel, more so than any other graphic novel before it. It tells the nonfiction story of a woman who grows up with a gay father and her journey. And Radioactive is a recent book by Lauren Redniss, who tells the story of Marie Curie, or the story of science. And believe it or not, her graphic novel is shelved not with graphic novels, but in the science shelves of libraries. So we see literature kind of shifting here to kind of incorporate and welcome these new creative expressions of research. So I identify as a writer, but sorry, I should have gone back. But I'm a writer who draws, and I'm not sure how to go back actually. But anyway, so there are several ways that I decided to go about the drawing process, and I realized that Lauren Redniss, while an idol of mine, she doesn't really take the time. She's a journalist, and I think journalists are different from ethnographers. Ethnographers take the time, I feel, to get to know the people, and we can work alongside the people as opposed to just taking the story and using it for our own personal gain. Anyway, I decided to carry this idea forward of maybe doing some sort of art book for my academic research. I started out in working at a seminary in Flores as a English teacher at a seminary high school. You can imagine, as a stubborn young woman living in a seminary full of teenage boys and priests, I felt like I needed to get out every once in a while. And the priests were amazing people with many connections. And they sent me to their acquaintances on the neighboring island of Lambata. So here's Lambata. Flores is over here. Solor was main center of the spice trade for the Dutch, well fought over a few centuries ago, and is now pretty quiet. And Lambata is over here. Lambata you might know from the whaling village of Lamalera, but it's also home to this town called Loang, where I spent several days working as a teacher and then went on to do about 6 months of research later on. So this is my family I stayed with, Pakado. I stayed and I worked with the kids. This is the reading garden. And this organization is just full of these visionaries. And you can see here, Katarina is Ibu Regina's sister. She runs a weaving collective. And then Ibu Regina is herself a healer. Pakado is the best spearfisher on the island, self-educated, and a former poacher turned turtle conservator. So each day the kids come home from school and they go to this reading garden and learn with donated books. And then 4 out of 6 endangered turtles hatch on this beach throughout the year. And these children are invited to help escort, mengantar, these hatchlings out to sea. So I was really intrigued by these communities, or this community, and felt like these people were already mobilizing towards change and I might be able to work alongside them. And Pakado over here also ended up, it turned out fortuitously that he was a healer. So Pakado combines Catholicism and customary forms of healing in order to cure people of various ailments that can't be cured in local clinics. This is from Adonara. And you might notice that they're both men. So I collected many stories from charismatic men like Pakado and Pak Payung over on your right. And then I went home and I realized that I had no stories of women. So this I felt as a woman, I'm like, you know what? There have to be some women healers out there. They have to be there. I guess I just wasn't listening. And then also I wonder, or maybe, so I started grad school and then things got a little more structured. And we might recognize some of the names here, maybe not. So some of the theorists that interested me and guided me were Clifford Geertz, who introduced the idea to many of us ethnographers that knowledge is geographically situated. So knowledge is situated in the ecosystem and the biosphere and with the spirits and with the communities who have grown off this land. Deleuze and Guattari, who considered knowledge as an assemblage. So knowledge isn't just a single thing, but a combination of many things bolt together. David Turnbull introduced to me the idea that knowledge can actually, as this assembled thing, can travel through its many different parts to different parts of the world and affect different places. So a story from Ibu Maria can affect someone in Los Angeles, or maybe Kain Tunun is a parcel of knowledge that can affect someone in another landscape. James Clifford introduced the idea that knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge systems, can make our own knowledge systems seem limited. And then as far as literature is concerned, Lila Abu-Lughod introduced ethnographies of the particular as a way of emphasizing humanity. So as opposed to talking about like, hey, this is what everyone in Lambata thinks. My goal is to say like, hey, here's what Ibu Maria thinks. Here is what Ibu Regina thinks. Here is what Ibu Ida thinks. Because each of us, I think because I can't even say like, here's what all Javanese people think. You know what I mean? Everybody has a different knowledge system that is a part of a whole, but I think the goal is to resist generalizations, because the danger of putting people into categories is that sometimes those categories become lesser. And then Carlo Ginzburg was inspired by Italian theories of microhistory. And he thought that instead of finding the mainstream narrative, the male narrative, the patriarchal narrative, let's find the offbeat one. So that's another reason why I decided to seek the women. The women weren't out there on the platform as healers, but they were there. And so I needed to find those histories. So as I mentioned, most existing scholarship portrays women as at the periphery of these ritual spaces, when actually they're the nurturers. They are the ones who help continue those knowledge spaces, but maybe in more quiet ways. So these are some scenes from women in Lambata. Okay. So my goals were to empower local women by avoiding reductionist narratives, by avoiding things that say, hey, all women in Lambata do this. My goal, according to my collaborators, was to menggelar Lambata. A lot of people don't know Lambata, but they should. It's an incredible place. It's a beautiful place. And people in Lambata want it to be known as a beautiful place imbued with wisdom. My goal is to promote literature as a way that can serve oral culture as opposed to like be in place of it. So how can literature be serve as documentation, maybe for people who want to continue their oral literature in the future for their coming generations? And then how can we explore local knowledge in ways that can help it travel to places that are outside its geographic region? How can local knowledge in Lambata travel outside of Lambata? So my challenges were to show rather than tell. Coming back to that world building, that Harry Potter-ness, that comic book world, that graphic novel sphere. How can we create worlds through our academic literature in ways that will get people interested in what we're saying? How can we curate a multiplicity of voices? So not saying just not saying like, hey, all women speak with this one voice, but saying, here are the many voices. And then how do I avoid killing the spirit of local voices through the literature? So we know orality as something that is vibrant, dynamic, it changes with the time. When we write it down, how do we write it down in a way that doesn't kill the spirit? So I talked about, I wanted to focus on the specific microhistories or the 5 women, as opposed to all women. So Ibu Regina, she was, I disguised all their names, by the way. So she, through her story, I tried to tell the story of how she healed her father-in-law who had verbally abused her extensively. And And through a dream, she realized the belief she needed to heal her ailing father-in-law, and healed the relationship between the two of them as well. So she is a healer in itself, because despite the fact that she's not necessarily considered a dukun, she restores balance in her community, in her daily life, and she can tap into those healing knowledges in a way that restores equilibrium to the traumatic events in her family history. Ibuleni is a woman who is trained as a clinical midwife. And she is now someone who also works alongside expecting mothers using traditional leaves as well. So she's clinically trained, but also realizes that biomedicine has its limitations. So she talks about calling upon Ibu Maria and praying over leaves and spitting out cotton as a way of stopping bleeding. Mama Lutok, or Ibu Maria as her pseudonym is, she has a special relationship with plants. So what she teaches is that only certain healers can have unique relationships with plants. And so everything we know about the biomedical industry, like why do certain medicines not work? Well, maybe it's because the relationships that we have between those who are making our medicine and the human bodies are different for all of us. And also she teaches us that we have to keep these relationships with our ancestors, the birds, the plants, in order to maintain our holistic health. Ibu Fiona, she's a prayer healer. So she tells the story of how she died for several hours, and how a local healer brought her back to life. So this attests to the power of prayer to restore people to health. Also, the attests to the power of curses and things that we cannot always see. And then finally, and I made sure that I included her as well, Ibu Ida is the head of the Department of Infectious Diseases at Lembata's leading hospital. And she is a biomedically trained healer and as Western as I am, as far as I am concerned, she doesn't really buy anything as far as indigenous healing is concerned. So she's a woman of Lembata, but she doesn't believe anything close to what Ibu Maria does. And so what does it mean to have two women on this small island who have these very powerful stories, one in which indigenous healing works and one in which it doesn't, and have them both present in this one form of literature? By the way, she does believe in spirit possession, but she doesn't believe in the power of Dukun, Bercelian. So I come back to this idea that through oral history, or oral history is literature, perhaps we can at least address the third issue. How can these stories teach us what indigenous knowledges can contribute to our own knowledge systems? And how can that empower these harborers of indigenous and local knowledge in ways that will help it continue for future generations? Okay, so my final questions, and please, I hope you have questions because this is still in its nascent stages. So where does this work have a home? In comparative literature, in sensory ethnography, in history, visual ethnography, which is still mostly just film and photography. Second, how can creative research expressions be used in academia to reach a wider audience? This is something I would love to continue, work with graduate students, hopefully in the future, who are interested in carrying their research forth into creative mediums. And then what sorts of ethical concerns should I be considering as a researcher and outsider who is kind of trying to promote literacy to an oral community? Okay, and I think I'll leave those questions up for now.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, you lead us to those questions to follow up, to explore. But for those who just joined, just to capture a little bit from what Julie was presenting during the presentation. So she was presenting us about stories of traditional healers, men and women from Lambata, and try to capture that, and then thinking about like how to bring it into outside, through which we could enjoy, through which we could also engage, the stories found, observed in those village, local communities. So those indigenous knowledge. And Julie is working on artistic, creative work through which she shows, not only tell about those stories, but shows how, those stories are being practiced and so maintained, and through which we could see how those knowledge could contribute, to our engagement into scholarship, into literature, and also many issues that we engage in this world. And so this question that Julie is offering us, to explore. And then I would let anyone here and also in YouTube who is interested to raise questions, comments, and also might make the discussion alive. So please, you could raise your question. All right, but Zainal.
Should I stop sharing?
Please, yeah, you could. Thank you, yeah. So Pak Zainal, thank you, Pak Zainal, please.
Thank you very much, Mas Ancho. And thank you, Julie. Very fascinating presentation. So I understand your last questions in the last slides. I may not be able to help you answer it, or not directly, not now. But before going there, I'm very interested to understand more about what you do, what you are doing, or what you are trying to do. So, so probably my question is rather abstract. I don't know, but I see there are several things here. First, you speak about knowledge, and then you speak about its transmission, and then this is about you as the author, but also about the local women in Lambata. So I'm trying to understand what you want to do here first. And you mentioned that you want, probably, if I get you correctly, you want to create something like something which people get when they read either Harry Potter or mouse or radioactive, several examples which you gave. So that is, I think, your interest, and I'm trying to understand also what is the interest of the local women whose story you are telling in this story. I mean, or in your telling their story. This is related to the idea. Well, you have several anthropologists you mentioned speaking about knowledge. So there are two things here: the knowledge itself and its transmission. I'm not quite sure. I mean, with the way you describe the knowledge today, how do you distinguish it with art, for example, or literature, or there is no need to make that distinction? But that also brings to me some questions about what is knowledge then. If we don't distinguish it with others, does knowledge needs to be shared? And knowledge, well, knowledge is probably something which can help us understand things or help us do things. And in you telling the story of these women, what do you want to achieve actually? So it goes back to my earlier question: what is your interest, and also what is the local women's interest? So yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Pazen. You could directly respond to Pazen's questions, Julie.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pakzano. These are great questions. So as far as what I'm trying to do as far as knowledge transmission is concerned, and this is the next stage of the project. So I've created this book. I knew I had to create this book, but the goal is to explore co-authorship through collage. So you might have noticed that some of the images have a combination of pictures and drawings in them. So my hope is that I will come back. So I'm considering down the road maybe publishing this, but never without consulting, my next step is to bring back this book. I'm in the process of translating it into Indonesian. And then I want to put this book in the hands of each of these women so that they can edit it, so that they can tell me do they want their pseudonyms in it, or do they want their real names, given names? And then maybe if it's okay as it is, when I do the next stage of my dissertation, is there a way that maybe the co-authorship could be more involved? So my hope is that I just want these women to have a place at the table as theorists. That's my goal. So my goal is to be a curator, but then to have them speak and have their turns of phrase and their characters kind of come off a page in a way that makes a reader want to listen to them and what they have to say as theorists. And that is a multi-step process. And I haven't figured that out yet. I know it involves me going back to Indonesia with this book in hand and saying, hey, here's what I did. Here's what I did. Are there changes you would like to make? Do you want it to be shared at all? And is it important for you to share it? So far, I have, in my interviews with them, they have expressed the desire to share their knowledge, mostly because they're not really given a voice right now. And so my hope, I think, is that these women will be present at the table in decision making when it comes to local laws that restrict women healers from practicing. Like Ibu Maria can't enter a hospital. Like that's a real concern. Like some indigenous healers just can't enter a hospital anymore. And the restrictions are tightening, and they're tightening without knowledge or without consent or consultation from these indigenous healers themselves. So that's a real goal that I think the women I work with and I kind of want to bring attention to. Just the fact that the indigenous women who have been trusted and respected for all this time just aren't even consulted, aren't in the decision-making process for the laws that govern them, or that decide whether or not they're legitimate healers or not. So I hope that answers that question. But I'm still figuring out how I can make this more collaborative, because that would be my goal. And then as far as, yeah, and then you mentioned the interest of local women. And the art and literature, yeah, I think the art and literature, the question of what is knowledge is an interesting question, because knowledge is, I think it can be reflected in both. The idea of knowledge production, I think in the institution, we think of it as something that has to be an academic paper. And I think that it can be an academic paper, but I think it can also be, we can also produce knowledge through literature, through storytelling. And that is part of my argument, I guess.
Okay.
Okay. Pak Zen, you want to respond back?
No.
Okay.
I think there are other questions as well.
All right. Thank you, Pak Zen. Yeah, I think I have some for that, but I will leave it for a while. For now, we have a question in the chatting room from Joko Widyatmoko. I think he is the alumni of ICRS. From your experience, this is his question. From your experience in Lembata, did you find any did you find that some indigenous medical knowledge there were that is extinct?
Okay, so what I'm hearing is like, are there some indigenous knowledges that have been neglected, forgotten?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. I've just done my master's, and so I feel like I need at least a year or more in this space to really understand the depth and longevity of this knowledge. But it seems that I don't know if extinct, I could call it extinct, but I'd say that the medical knowledge has definitely been, or the indigenous knowledge has definitely been adapted for the times. And Ibu Maria, who has lived in the mountains of Lyric, is probably the most in touch with maybe some of the older methods of healing, just because she doesn't have a cell phone. She doesn't have a lot of these outside, actually she tries to reject these outside influences, which try to impose ideas of what is or isn't healing. But I'm sure there are many forms of medical practices that are no longer done anymore, especially since Catholicism kind of curated which kinds of indigenous healing were allowed and which weren't.
Okay, thank you. we also have another one in the chat, but I would come to those who raise his hands. To the one who is Mas Iqbal, Mr. Iqbal Ahnaf. You still remember? You remember him, yeah?
Of course.
Should I introduce?
Hello.
Okay.
Hello, Lee.
Okay, please, Mas
Thank
Iqbal.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Julie, for your presentations, and it's fascinating. Wait, my daughter asked me to do something. Just a minute. Just a second. Okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I really like the way you know this is the way you deliver the research in this model of books, and I know this is something that I think is that is different, and actually I share this talk to my student at the undergraduate program at the physical department, and I asked them to watch this talk and learn something from this talk, and maybe later we can share about what is the students' impressions about this talk. But there is something which I would like to ask, because I found some what is missing in your presentations is about I mean, I believe this is a traditional indigenous practice, and there must be a belief system behind that. Yeah? Right, the worldview, the way they conceive concept of God, concept of nature, the way what is this is something which I think is also important behind this practice. Not only talking about what they do in this practice, what is the belief system behind that, and of course we know that this is a traditional indigenous practice, but the area is I think today is a dominant Catholic or Christian community. So I believe some of those healers may already also practice Christianity or Catholicism. So how does this interact between this traditional religious belief and the world religious belief? So yeah, if you can talk about that, maybe that I would like to something that which I think will also be interesting to learn.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Iqbal. So also hello, if there are students of Mas Iqbal in the audience, I would love to hear your responses and suggestions as well. So as far as the religion is concerned, yes, I didn't dive into that, but I agree, it's a very important question. So the Lama Holot belief system generally operates on this idea that first and foremost, the ancestors are present in these sacred rocks that exist in these clan territories. And it's extremely important at several times of the year to pay tribute to these ancestors. Alongside Lera Wulan, which is Father Sky, Tana Ekan, which is Mother Earth. So this Father Sky, Mother Earth, and then this kind of like intermediary spirit world was able to integrate itself very well into the Catholic Trinity. So Catholicism, I would say Lambata is about 97% Catholic. And the Dutch brought over Catholicism in the, I believe it was the 18th century. And it carried on very well. There was a Lama Holot kingdom in East Flores, and they kind of conquered the areas of Lambata and the neighboring island of Adonara. And so the belief system in Lera Wulan, Tana Ekan, and then the ancestral spirits infused with Catholicism. So the Lama Holot kingdom worked alongside the Dutch government to conquer these territories, has been a part of Lambata's landscape for a very long time. Then what I'm exploring now, and this is going to be the next phase of my research, is how strict these local communities have been, are becoming about adhering to strict Catholic faith. So there are, of course, things that the Catholic Church doesn't always believe or condone, like curses. Traditionally, the Molan or the Dukun and the Swangi, or the sorcerer, have been a part of the Lamahola landscape before Catholicism. And so this Swangi, this sorcerer, traditionally was the one who would channel the ancestors in order to like attack any dangerous contenders, but then also protect their own clan. And so what's interesting, I think, here is that you do have like Ibu Fiona, who's a prayer healer, and she practices Catholic religion, prays to Mother Mary, but it's really her connection with her ancestors on this landscape that gives her the power to heal, and it's outside the church. So what you have is you have this marriage, this interconnecting marriage between adat and agama. And the idea is, I mean, this one way of example is, say Mas Iqbal, you curse me. You curse me so that I, like I can't speak for several months, right? I go to a Molan or a Dukun who tells me that it's your fault. And then you admit it, you said, yeah, it's Julie, I was the one who cursed you. And then first, we don't go straight to a priest. First, we go to the Molan or the Dukun. The Dukun does the ceremony. And so the Dukun is the one who performs the rites, asks forgiveness from the ancestors, so our ancestors don't fight somewhere in the ether. And then after that is rectified, I might be speaking, so things might be okay already. But then we will both go to the Catholic priest and he will perfect it. So the pemulihan is the restoration of balance, and that's done through adat. But the perfection is done through the Catholic faith.
Interesting, very good illustrations. Yeah, yeah. So there is a tensions and what accommodations happening at the same time. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Julie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Iqbal. Thank you, Julie. So let's move to the question in the chat. So someone is sharing his experience related to yours, and so he is asking. This is from Tarmizi Abbas, not doing research in Gorontalo, similar things. So his question is this: how if the community perceived that sharing their knowledge to others would make their ancestors going mad? So he said, I'm actually on this condition during my field work. So encountering that situation, do you have some experience similar to that? Like they want to share, they don't want to share it like off the record,
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. So Tarmizi, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. This is a real issue, and it's something that I've asked my collaborators over and over, like, is it okay that I'm recording this? Is it okay? But, and why I haven't gone forward yet with publishing this, why I'm getting a translator, why I want this to go back into the hands of the people I work with before I do anything else with it, is because, yes, they've said it's okay that I share their knowledge, or that we share their knowledge. But to publish it is a completely different thing. So maybe it will make the ancestors mad. But that's the next question that I'm going to ask my collaborators. Is this, and, you know, taking it to the clan elders too. Like, I think that's, so the clan elders, or the Tuan Tanah in each clan, is generally the one who calls the shots and who is in closest communication with the ancestors themselves. So Tarmizi, your question is an incredible one, because I do need to make sure that, even though my collaborators might have said, yeah, it's okay that you share my ancestors' knowledge, I need to make sure that I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna disrupt any clan balance or equilibrium. And I will say that there is an example of a really sad example of a professor who was a very good writer, and he actually went to UCLA. His name is Peter Nabokov, and you can look him up. And he worked with an American Indian indigenous community, and they were kind of outcasts. And he collected their oral history of this huge clan history, and he thought it was beautiful, and he thought that it should go in the books. And he didn't ask their consent until 2 weeks before the publisher distributed the book. He didn't ask consent from the community until it was already too late. And so he pretty much lost his career, because the entire indigenous community in the United States was in an outcry, because he polluted the sacred history. He made the ancestors, as you said, go mad. So I think it's all about respect and consent. And what my hope is that in the future, we as ethnographers will really collaboratively edit our research with our communities, so they can help us decide what is ethical to share and to publish. So have not only ask consent at the beginning, but then come back and ask for consent at the end. I hope that answers your question.
He's actually adding some more. He wanted to talk, but he has a problem with his microphone. Let me write it for you. Oh, this is from Ajis. Sorry, another one from Ajis. Okay. From Ajis AF. Hi, Julie. Thank you for your presentation. So first, how frequent did the kind of miracles of prayer to bring a dead baby back alive, or other similar stories, if any, you told in the beginning of your presentation really occur? Second, you wanted to bring indigenous healers on the same table as theorists, or perhaps also scientists. I would imagine that some judgmental modern scientists on the table would then ask, how would you justify that? How would you justify that indigenous knowledge about healing can be put in parallel with modern biomedicine, which in the standard of modern epistemology, for example, theory about knowledge has to be testable, applicable, falsifiable, and so on and so forth. Would you argue that if someone is sick, he or she may go to either hospital
or dukun or kiai or priest, how would you respond to them? A long question, but I think it's okay. And he said, hope my question doesn't feel too harsh.
No.
Doesn't feel too harsh. Yeah. I think great questions.
Yes, they're great questions. And you know what, this actually is really interesting to me because, well, the first one I answered that question in my book. And the second one, I don't know, I turned in 2 master's theses. So I did my one art book, and then I turned in another 119 page scholarly thesis. So the second question is answered in my scholarly thesis. So this is just to say, I'm not saying throw away all the academic scholarship. I think, you know, I'm not saying, but I'm saying that both can work alongside each other. I'm also saying that I also think that, and I hope the stories convey this too, that the biomedicine and the indigenous healing can work alongside each other. So in some cases, at least when the laws were more relaxed, sometimes the doctors of a pregnant woman would welcome the healers into the hospital to help the women along in the pregnancy. So in the history of, like in Lambata, there used to be more collaboration or just dialogue really between doctors and indigenous healers. So my practical proposal at the end of my scholarly thesis was that maybe there be a health or healing conference in Lambata, an annual conference in which both medical professionals and indigenous healers are present as panelists, and they would speak, and perhaps medical professionals could have that opportunity to meet indigenous healers in a way that they might not have otherwise, and maybe learn the capacity of these indigenous healers in a way that would allow them to maybe work with them, collaborate with them in the future. Not to say that, like, because there are certain circumstances in which, like, Ibu Maria would say her stuff is testable, probably. So, but it just might not be testable in a laboratory. To answer your question, Ibu Maria says she's raised a child from the dead 3 times. And she's helped hundreds of others. So, yeah, I think my goal isn't to necessarily tell people what to do or what laws should be made, but really just I wonder if it's possible to create a space of dialogue between these medical healers and the indigenous healers. That's pretty much my only goal. Like, I think it's not my job, my knowledge, my capacity to suggest a legal solution, but I just hope that there could be a space for dialogue, and then they can decide how to make a compromise.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Julie. The next one, we still have one. And by the way, we still have 10 minutes left to discuss. So I just say thanks to you for answering his question. So the next one, which is from Barus, he's asking actually about, is there any way of transmitting, like do they have methodology of transmitting? I'm trying to figure it out. Okay, sorry. Thank you for your presentation, Julie. My questions: how has the local knowledge been transmitted to the younger generation? in Lembata community to preserve it? Do you have some specific ways or methods like to offer to them and so they could preserve it?
Yeah, so that's another question that I've been talking about with my collaborators. Is part of the reason why I think that a book is kind of nice, and there have been some local writings on the history of Lembata, but they're all pretty much about men, by male priests about men, and traditional healings in general. So there has been some documentasi, but then also the youth have all these technologies coming in, and like when I was in Solor, I had this really long discussion with a local healer or clan head who said he has this amazing healing capacity, and his nephew has been gifted with the ability to heal as well, but he's just not interested in inheriting and following through with that knowledge. So there's that I think that's an issue too. It's like, well, we're in a world in which things unfortunately seem to have more weight if they're written. And I think that's problematic for sure. And I just wonder if literacy can be one way of just documenting what knowledge looks like at this point in time. And so creating a book like this, working with kids maybe, is one way that I think, I hope will just like incite excitement about, hey, like this, our history is important too. I remember working in Flores and even with high school kids. And I asked the history teacher in Flores, and this is the best high school in one of the best high schools in Nusa Tenggara Timur, if any of the history books had anything on Lembata or East Flores, and he said no. All of the history recorded in the history books are about Java, Sumatra, and some about Kalimantan and Bali. So it says something. I think it means something for kids to want to learn their history. Like, you know, I think there's an urgency in first helping, like it's important for today for students in those communities or kids in those communities to really see. I don't know. I mean, it's not my job to impose, but I think we have to recognize the beauty of our own histories in order to gain confidence in our own communities. So I don't have the answer to that, but I do know, I think the book, the accessible part of the book is to get these younger kids excited about their own histories.
Okay. Tarmizi is sharing about his experience having difficulties in accessing information about, you know, stories about ancestors. So he's still waiting for the signs because he was told to wait for the signs for, you know, for the informant to tell about the information that Tarmizi is asking about. That is, I think that is very much about methodology, about like how you engage with your community, and not only that you have lack of, it's not about that you're lacking in methodology of doing it and accessing, but that is like some of the issues that we face in the field working with these very issues. And while waiting for someone else, I mean for others, I want to also like raise some question, no comments with this. from those questions, and also from the about the knowledge, and also your question about like where to put this. I think I mean understanding the existing representation of indigenous knowledge, we see like in every angle the challenges because of the knowledge production that has been made, like in every single, in medicine, in medical, even in anthropology, let alone religious studies, like how hard, this kind of knowledge to bring into discussion, to bring into the table for discussion. There's so many questions about them. Are they valid? Are they, so I think like to respond to your question, like your question in the last presentation of yours, this is, I think, the struggle to bring it into any single potential table of any discipline, because that is where we find the misrepresentation of indigenous knowledge. There's so many knowledge. One of the discussion, I think one of the subjects which is very important in indigenous religious studies is about indigenous methodology, that we have to engage the coloniality, the modernity, that also has influenced, knowledge, which is about power. Like for us to bring this into table, how powerful we are. It's not only the people, but even us. And for knowledge, like what kind of knowledge? There's so many questions. Sometimes we are also being claimed to be what? No, talking about noble savage, romanticism, right? Like when we say something good about these people, we are claimed to be beautifying the people, romanticizing the people. Those are the traps, like we always encounter for us, to bring into discussion the difficulties. And so what we see, not only the people, not only the people like struggling to bring their voices, but even us like trying to engage the scholarship. I mean, we also hear some scholars who are also kicked out from the, the academic debates because of their, engagement into the local knowledge for them, to bring into dialogue. So coming back to your question, I think like where to bring this, we should bring it to, I think you discuss in the culture and performance in art, we should also discuss it in religious studies, in cultural studies, anywhere, because we see, that is where the representation of such knowledge have misrepresented, have excluded. Do you want to respond to that?
So, Mas Andre, I mean, what I'm hearing is that you think that you see knowledge as something that can be reflected in multiple disciplines, and that indigenous knowledge should have a place in multiple disciplines. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that is like the struggle, because there's so, little spaces like we could find in many disciplines, yeah? And so we could, I think what you're doing should be brought to any disciplines. And, interdisciplinary study would be like a way of engaging with it. As I said, like, modern knowledge has, conquered all disciplines, conquered the world, through which we learn, through which we learn things. And so yeah, I think that is like what I would respond to your questions. if you have last comment statements, we come to the end of the time for this.
Tarmizi, I hope you get a sign too. That's pretty stressful.
Yeah, there is something called in addition, in relation to that. I mean, what I learned from the people. I mean, if I bring it to the theory, that is called like esoteric knowledge. You need like to struggle, you know, to come to that points in order for you to find the knowledge. I mean, my experience, like I struggled for 3 months working with someone for him to tell me, to trust me. Now this is the time I can tell you. After 3 months struggling, you know, working with him. So yes, Arif, good luck, Arif. We pray for you too. Julie, I think we enjoy a lot your presentation. Thank you very much. Again, before ending it, I would offer you one more time, like if you have last statement to make.
Yes, and Pak Zainal, thank you for mentioning that and coming back to this at the end. I think the key is co-authorship, and that's really what I'm trying to work towards here. And I think it's new territory, maybe for many of us who recognize that there's been kind of a colonial way of doing academia, of doing literature, of doing research. And I think this is all part of my exploration into co-authorship. And what does that mean? And I would love to keep this conversation going with you. I'm gonna keep my, type my email into the chat. I would love if you have comments or suggestions, or would like to keep this conversation going, share your research, please don't hesitate to reach out. But co-authorship is the answer, and it's also the question. So I will be exploring this probably for, well, undoubtedly for many years in the future. So thank you all for welcoming me here.
Thank you, Julie. We would, of course, always always be happy to welcome you anytime, both in Zoom and also physical. Yeah, we miss you too, to come back to Jogja, to Indonesia, to CRCS-ICRS. And thank you very much to all of you, to all participants, Pak Zainal, Mas Iqbal, Mas Arif, Mas Aziz, having those questions. And all participants, I think that is the end of our discussion today for our Wednesday forum. Just to let you know that next week for our next Wednesday forum would be Mas Aziz. You would help me. So I think I would just let this, give this to Mas Aziz to make some announcements. And thank you very much again. My apology if there is something that is not impressive from me. We will see you again next week. Thank you all. Mas Aziz, are you there? He is not there. So who would be next time? Would be a professor from Canada, Pak Daniel. His name is Pak Daniel, but forgot his last name. And we will give you a complete information about next Wednesday forum through CRCS and ICRS social media, Facebook, website, and also the WhatsApp group. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Julie.
Thank you,
Julie.
Yeah, Pak Zainal, you had such amazing questions. Did I answer them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I still need to think about it. Yeah.
If something comes up for you, please please do let me know, because this is really